and maybe that will let.
Thank you, Dan. All right, I think it is being recorded now in progress. So, buenas tardes, damas y caballeros, ladies and gentlemen. So thank you, Dan, for that intro. As I was thinking about this presentation, I'm going to say just a big disclaimer, right? First off is, I'm here not because of what necessarily I've accomplished, but because you get to a certain age where you've made more mistakes than others. and that's the thing why I'm here. And then of course, Dan is like, like Edgar, I can't find anybody. Would you step up? And I was like, sure, no. Just joking. And then second thing too is just by virtue of somebody told me, if you just throw in a jacket, it will make you an expert on the topic. And so that's what I did. And so now, of course, I have my legitimacy has increased, probably at least 10%. So anyway, what I'm hoping to have is just a conversation, with the folks here, with Dan, anybody else that wants to chime in. I'm not going to talk for too long, but I want us to go back and forth and just discuss some of the stories and some of the topics that I will share with you. But before I begin, I want to ask the folks group, whoever's attending, I don't know how many we have now, but even if it's a small group, the following question, right, that you usually ask when you're meeting somebody. So where are you from, right? And so if you're going to put in the chat and you can read it off, Dan or Matthias, the folks, where there's your heritage. What is your heritage? I'll start in saying, I'm originally from Mexico. My family migrated across the border in the 80s. We actually, kind of went through the customs. But I just want to hear and just get a feel for the folks that are here. What is their background? I see there's some chat going on there. All right, Mazatlan. Oh, look, when I was 8. Awesome. Gracias, Gustavo. Uruguay, right? Anybody else? And you could say, well, I'm from I don't know, from Texas. And the reality is, in this country that we're all in today, it's you're either here because you're Native American, your predecessors have always been here, you're an immigrant, you are I guess historically here because of slavery, or a refugee, right? There's at least just 4, I think, pretty much options that you can think about how you came here to this country or your predecessor. So the point here is everybody, Colombia, oh wow, 26 years, that's awesome. My family, when my dad came here, he said, we're just gonna go to the US for 1 year, and 1 year turned into 2, into 5, into 10, into 20, and so the rest is history. But everybody has a story, and I love hearing stories about how people came to this country, how people got their first job, even also how people met their loved one, right, their partner of life. It's always so interesting, right? And I think part of the story that I want to say is everybody's got a unique story, and I think it could be me up here, but it could have been any of you sharing your own journey of trials and tribulations and wins and victories. And so, where I want to take this is, and as you remember from the description, is, whether you're the first Latino in your company, or you're perhaps a new parent, or you are, an entrepreneur, you're really in a position of leadership. There's people, behind you that are going to watch your moves. There are people next to you, your colleagues, and there's even people ahead of you or above you. They're going to see how you're performing. And so if you think about the whole spectrum, all the different dimensions that you can consider, it's, you are a leader, in a way, whether you like it or not. Now, being a parent is one of the most interesting roles, because as my father said, being a parent is one of the few jobs where you get the title first, and then you get the training, right? Especially for first-time parents. And so one of the things that I want to talk about here is the aspect of risk-taking, because as I mentioned the prior couple of slides, everybody's got a story. So there's stories about our personal and the stories that are professional. And so the chevron that you see here, when was the last time you took a risk? I want you to type in the chat whether it's a personal risk or a professional risk. When was the last time you took a risk? What did you do it, What did you do? For whom? How did it feel? You don't have to write all these things, but these are just food for thoughts, right? How did it feel? What were the outcomes? And then would you do it again? So as you think about it, and Dan, maybe you can share some of yours when as people are typing some of the things in. But I want to hear about when was the last time you took a risk.
Yeah, so thank you. That was an interesting. I was just thinking about that. And I was vigorously trying to type like my last risk, right? And I didn't really think about that, so I had to stop for a second. And I'm thinking, the last risk I took, and I was like, wait a second, I have probably taken very few personal risks lately. And I'm like, I should be doing more of that, or maybe I'm just like COVID adverse or something like that, but I just gave you this big speech about how I'm now post-pandemic, so we'll see what happens there. But I can tell you, like, professionally, I think I took a big risk about a year and a half ago, and I continue to compound that risk. And it's I say it's the biggest risk that I took was asking for help and being vulnerable to other people.
Gotcha.
Right. And so being able to say, like, hey, I don't know what to do, or I don't know how to do this. And I have now come to the point where I know I need help.
Right.
And I think that I have just like an ego problem sometimes, where I just get like so into it. Like I'm like so like I'm not going to ever ask for help, and I don't want to reveal any weakness, that I'm not going to ask the question.
Right.
And I've now gotten over that, or I'm working to get over that.
Well, it takes humility, right? That's a journey in humility where we think we can figure things out. Sometimes it's pride that gets in the way. I'm going to do it. I don't really want to ask. But I think if there's something that the LPA was created for, I think is to leverage each other's networks and expertise. I'm not an attorney, and obviously I would need to ask for legal help if I am about to establish a business, or maybe there's an architect that I'm building a house. Obviously I don't know, so I have to know what my limitations are and be ready to ask for help. I see that Gustavo said went to work in academia, more fulfilling work. That's interesting. That is so fascinating, because oftentimes we don't know what the other side is going to look like, right? Is if you saw in my first slide is the border between Tijuana and the United States. You don't know. That's why I admire the immigrant that takes a chance of leaving their comfort zone to be able to explore new territories. And much like an entrepreneur, you don't know what's on the other side. You just have an idea, a hypothesis, you have a will, you have a conviction, and you go for it. But sometimes you don't know, and sometimes you do have to do those trade-offs, which kind of brings me to the point at the bottom, that decisions versus outcomes. So I took a class a while back at a fine institution down in Palo Alto, and one of the things that they talked about was this concept of decisions versus outcomes. And this is interesting because not every good decision will lead to a good outcome. And conversely, not every bad decision will lead to a bad outcome. So let's say, for example, you decide to, I'll give us an example of the latter. You decide to, you're at a dinner party, you consume more alcohol than you probably should have, and you decide to drive home. Well, that was a horrible decision, but you make it home okay. Well, you had a good outcome, right? And the same thing with good decisions. Maybe you made a really good decision to give. I took a decision to give this presentation. I don't know how the outcome's going to be.
It's going to be fantastic. First off, it's going to be a fantastic outcome.
Yeah. So that's what I'm hoping. But the whole idea is notion about probabilistic thinking, right? The more good decisions you make, all in all, if you look at the numbers, you should have better outcomes. But do not be surprised if sometimes a good decision will lead to a bad outcome. Now, I will share with you kind of a personal anecdote about me doing a risk taking on a personal note, right? And that's when I met I met a woman at a party, and I thought she was great. Kind of started going out, and very soon after, a few weeks after, she went to see her family in South America. And I had plans to. It was during the holidays, and I had plans to go to Cuba at the time. And so I said, wow, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to surprise her instead. I'm going to cancel my flight to Cuba, and I'm going to go down to Chile. South America. And of course, there are people who are saying, well, you crazy, you're nuts, you're insane. That's kind of creepy. You're stalking her. Because we had just met, very, very briefly. And the way I looked at it, I did my calculus, and I thought, look, I'm not necessarily going to go see her. I was going to go to Cuba to just, travel, get to know, parts of the world that I've never visited. I'm going to go secure my own place, my own room, and I'll let her know, hey, I'm here. I'm going to just go, up the Andes, go to the oceans, go to wine country. If you want to come along, great. If not, no worries. Well, I decided to let her know, hey, I'm going to go down there. I didn't want to just knock on her door and say, I was just in the neighborhood. But and some people were saying, before I went down there, I would sit at a coffee shop and talk with friends and the bartenders or, the waitress, and they would say, oh yeah, that's great, just do it, surprise her. And some people were like, no, that's, so you have all this spectrum, right, of people that would consider that like a good decision or a bad decision. Anyway, to me, the end of the story was that it was actually a good outcome, because that is the woman that I married, and she said yes to. So it was a bold move, and I think she, we always tell that story about, when you want something, you kind of go for it. And it's kind of like the housing market in Madison. It's really hot and really hard to get a home. A lot of competing offers. You got to put your best offer out there to get the home that you want. And sometimes you think, shoot, I overpaid, but then you got a home that you wanted. And so I think just from a personal perspective, that's a personal risk that I took. From a professional perspective, there's times where I've challenged some major decisions, senior leadership. There was one time I worked at a prior company where I was in data analysis and research, and the numbers about customer satisfaction were kind of low. And I shared this with our VP of marketing, and she was like, no, like, tell a different story. Like, this is not the story we want to tell. I was like, well, how can we like tell a different story? What do you mean? Long story short, I almost got fired for presenting what I thought was the truth. And long story short, I sort of like poetic justice. Eventually, this person, even though they moved up in the organization, and eventually at the end, they were let go. And so it's kind of an unfortunate thing, because I never want anybody to be let go. But it's one of those things where sometimes you do have to stand up and you have to speak your truth. And it is difficult sometimes for us that, whether we're immigrants or we're people of, minorities, that we're sometimes are afraid to speak up because of the consequences that can come with it. And so I don't know if any of you have been in those situations, but risk taking is not for the faint of heart, for sure. You've got to have some thick skin. You got to be able to, to suffer the consequences, whatever they may be. So Dan, you want to add anything to that?
Well, I don't have an amazing story of meeting my wife like that, so that was pretty good. But on the business side, I think you're 100% right. There is a test of telling truth to power, right? Can you say something that's unpopular in a group, and or will you go along with the group? And I think that goes back to your like decision making, right? Because I think that's the challenge with teams, and the challenge of really kind of standing out too, is that you can choose to be a contrarian in life, but that's typically not a good policy. But you can choose to be a critical thinker, and you can take a risk to say like, hey, I disagree with this decision, and lay out why you disagree with that decision. And if the chips work out and you said, hey, this is going to work out, it's like you differentiated yourself in a positive way. And if you didn't, what you were really representing is you're looking out for the team and the product and saying, hey, I just want to make sure we all do well. And so they have some characteristics that you can really leverage.
Absolutely. And that kind of, brings us to the point of leadership, if you will, because, you can take personal risk, professional risk. And as I said at the beginning, if you're one of the few Latinos in a big company, or you're an entrepreneur or a new parent or a mentor, there's gonna be some standard by which you are measured, if you will, right? And so as I begin thinking about this session and the LPA, you can replace the Latin with leaders, right? Because we're all leaders in a certain way. What is a leader? So if you look at Merriam-Webster, the second definition that they give there is a guide conductor, a person who directs a military force or unit, I thought it was kind of combative, a very combative definition. But the one, so 2B2 is a person who has commanding authority or influence. And I thought, that's just interesting. And so there's a lot of books. I mean, they're unlimited number of books. How many, Dan, do you know how many books Amazon, now don't look it up now, how many books Amazon has on leadership? Any guesses?
I'd say 5,000.
5,000?
Yes.
What would you surprise you if I told you it was tenfold that?
What?
50,000. Over 50,000. I think it's 53 was the last.
That is amazing.
Isn't it? It's crazy. So if you want to read about leadership, there's just plenty of content out there. It's never ending. And so I've read some of those books and servant leadership and is in different stories. But I think one of the best metaphors, I think, on leadership that somebody shared with me, and I like to share it with you, paying it forward, was this concept of thermostat versus a thermometer. Now, some of you young ones probably don't know what this is, especially if you live in a newer home. But this is actually in my house. I have one of these in my house upstairs. I grabbed this from the web. I could have taken a picture of it and just put it in instead. I should have done that. But the top part is the thermostat, right? Is the one that sets the temperature. And the temperature of your house is the little red dial at the bottom, which is a thermometer. It's taking the temperature. And so it's interesting because somebody said, look, a leader is a person who sets the temperature in a room, who sets the climate in a room. So think about it. Maybe when we were all back together in the office and everybody was, sitting down, and it was right before our meeting started, and maybe it was a really quiet meeting. There was a little energy, but in walks the leader, and all of a sudden the room sparks up. There's people feel like, okay, now we're going to get something done. Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe this is just a lot of people are happy, and all of a sudden in walks in a leader, and the tone, the climate, like the temperature goes down. It's like, oh, it's getting a little chill in here. I've had both. I've had both, brothers and sisters. And so what the question here is, who do you want to be, a thermostat or a thermometer, right? And it's important because, again, it doesn't matter, and I'm going to talk about some of the misconceptions, some of the myths here in a moment, the situation that you're in, but are you able to influence the temperature of the room by virtue of your presence? I'm going to say it again. Are you able to influence the temperature of the room or the climate in the room by virtue of your presence? All right. And if the answer is yes, then you have the skills and or this potential to be a leader. And I think we all do, except that sometimes we don't know. We don't know. So any thoughts on that, Dan?
So I've never seen this presented this way, but I gotta tell you, like, I immediately gravitated toward that idea, right? And I mean, it makes me think of a lot of our team meetings, and I think they're good and bad, right? So sometimes I've been the thermometer that have brought the team or the temperature down, and that's like, dude, we got to get some stuff done. Let me just tone it down in here, right? And then you see bring that low energy or the cooling piece. And then the flip side is, like, you get into a group, and I think this is very common of new teams or teams that are very shy and have not learned how to work together yet, where they're very formal and they haven't figured out how to become informal, is that your job as that thermostat is to figure out how to bring that temperature up and to bring the informality to the formal group to make everybody function as a team and be productive and to contribute to the whole. And so, God, no, I love this idea.
Well, thank you. Like I said, I can't take credit. It was actually at a conference, and he was an African-American gentleman. I can't remember his name. It was many years ago, but I just loved it, and I think I want to go to the chat because I know Norma asked a question about what are your top 3 leadership books to speak to the Latin experience. That's a hard one, Norma, because I think that for me, it's, I can think of, for example, Cesar Chavez, right? And you think about folks that have influenced the trajectory of the politics of this country. But also when I think about identity, my own identity, I tend to have a more global view of my identity. Perhaps because I was an immigrant, I lived in Mexico, the United States, also lived in Europe for a few years. And I've always had friends from different parts of the world, is that I'm always trying to grab and extract from different cultures. And so I cannot answer that directly, but I'm sure if we did a Google, or maybe the LPA can recommend some really good books. Dan, do you know, have you read any books that have that talk about the Latinx or the Latino experience?
I have not. I was just, I saw that question from Norma as well, and I kind of immediately pulled up my Audible to see what I had in my Audible collection that worked. And I think Norma asked a really good question. I mean, I think that's actually part of the value of why we're doing these webinars and why we're talking about it, is that I don't think there is a good framework for the Latinx experience, right? For the Latino experience. And I think a couple leadership books that come to mind are The Four Disciplines of Execution. So a real tactical book of how to move the agenda forward. There's a book from Simon Sinek. It's called Start with Why. That's becoming significantly more popular. There's the Gary Vaynerchuk of Crush It. Learn how to do a little bit of self-promotion along the way.
Well, and this brings a question, Norma. Maybe you can be one of the people that writes her book. Maybe as a Latina. We often look to others for inspiration, and it's true. But again, going back to the second slide that I showed you, the third one, where you have your own compelling story. Paola Ramos, who you might not know, she wrote a book about finding Latinx. Is finding that identity across the United States, and it just talks about her journey. She interviewed a whole bunch of people across the United States. She went to different parts of towns, urban cities, rural areas, and just talk to them about what it meant to be, a Latinx. What about the term, right? Because that's a relatively new term, Latinx, and so it means different things to different people. But anyway, I think it's something that we ought to probably do as an organization, is to find and see those recommendations. So, this actually, Dan, this brings me to my next slide, which is when you think about, and I put it in the question, right? When you think about leaders, what are some of the characteristics of a good leader? Take a few seconds to type in the chat. When you think about just stream of consciousness, just type this: what does a good leader have? Just some adjectives. Empathy, yes. Authenticity or authentic. Yes. What else? Decisive, assertive, yes. Assertive communication, absolutely. Yeah. I'm going to share with you some of the ones that I've been thinking about, because I think we all have maybe somebody in mind when we think about a leader, right? Because we've all had people that we've looked up to. So, in my case, I think I would say the charisma. So this aura about them that is just very magnetic, right? You want to listen to them. They also have a clear vision. I think they stand for something. It reminds me of, I don't know if any of you saw Hamilton, the play, and if Aaron Burr, and Hamilton, if you stand for nothing, Burr, what will you fall for, right? And so I think that's something very important. Where they stand. Competent. They're very competent, right? I think they know their stuff. They're also very creative. So there's the ability to connect the dots in a very unique way. There's a level of humility. That's something that I tend to admire personally. This just is easy to get in your own ego and say, well, hey, I'm the leader of this crew, so you got to listen to everything I say. It's this level of humility. But they're also bold. They're unafraid to challenge the status quo. They're empowering. I'm going to look at this. So I see initiative. Nidia says confidence. Thinkers. Okay. So empowering, I think that they let you grow, right? They help you. They're just not always telling you what to do, but said, hey, I just want you to get that flag and bring it back here. I don't care how you get it. Just, it's up to you. I trust you. They're entrusting. They're also selfless. I think that people, they're not just about them. It's about helping others. They're decisive yet inclusive. I mean, ultimately they'll make the decision, but they take opinions from different, individuals. They're reliable. You can count on them, right? You can count on the fact that they will be there to help you out. You ever had a leader that said they were going to do something and then they don't do it? You kind of start to lose credibility, right? They're compassionate and empathetic. I think some of you said that, empathetic, and then honest and truthful. I think it's something that if you have a leader that you don't know what's going to come out of their mouth, that you start to doubt, again, their credibility or if their intentions. And so, to me, at least, those are things that I can share with you that I've seen in individuals. Now, frankly, I can't tell you one individual has had all these things. It's very rare, but I think individuals possess certain dimensions of that. And so, to me, when I look at that, is I can say, how much of this am I reflecting with the people that I am around? How much do I reflect it with, in my school or at work or at school of academics or at home or in the church or whatever you may be. So I'm going to check the chat here real quick where it says respected. Yes, respected. It is somebody that people respect. Absolutely. So, well, I'm going to share with you some quotes on leadership just because I wanted to do a random check and I want to see, what do people say? So, from the ancient times to the modern times, from Lao Tzu, the Chinese philosopher, the art of war. It says a leader is best when people barely know he exists. When his work is done, his aim fulfilled, it will say, we did it ourselves, right? So it's kind of like the invisible hand moving things around. That's one way, because other people are very visible. Look at what Malala, Yousafzai has said. There's a moment where you have to choose to be silent or stand up. And that's very important, because I don't think very few leaders, I don't know very many leaders that have been quiet. Maybe they've been quiet in public, but maybe behind the scenes, kind of like Lao Tzu says, but they usually stand up and speak their truth. Paulo Coelho, right? The Brazilian author, be brave, take risks, nothing can substitute experience. Sheryl Sandberg, CEO of Facebook, right? I actually like her quote. It says, leadership is about making others better as a result of your presence, going back to the thermostat, and making sure that impact lasts in your absence. Like, wow, that's pretty powerful. And then look at what Nelson Mandela says. He says, it's better to lead from behind and to put others in front, especially when you celebrate victory, when nice things occur. But you take the front line when there is danger. People appreciate your leadership. So there's the thing about selflessness, being able to sacrifice yourself for others. And then finally, a famous Oprah Winfrey, she says, the world's most prominent women leaders show the importance of honesty, courage, impact, and decisive action in leadership. So, it's interesting. Again, there's no one size fits all. I don't think you can possibly define leadership with one word. And I like this. This is from Harvard's website, the paradox of leadership. And I think that quote here at the bottom, or that paragraph, it says, leadership is an art, not a science, and is not limited to professional field or industry. Leaders transcend the confines of a defining box, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit about this in a moment, but I think it's interesting because I would argue that if you are a leader somewhere, okay, whether it's maybe in your academics, school, and not necessarily with good grades, I'm not talking about that, but maybe you decide to run for student government or the treasurer, right? You said, I'm gonna make something happen. I remember in CUNA Mutual, we have an employee resource group for Latinos. It's called Amigos, and I joined a company about 4.5 years ago. And there was the person running the team, who was the lead, and he left to a different company. And nobody wanted to step up. And I was like, there's very few of us. Like, why isn't anybody stepping up? But I was relatively new, and I knew how much work there was going to be involved. And I said, you know what? I'm not the type of person that, I don't like silence. I don't like there to be no decision. I like to say, boom, just like with my wife, right? I'm like, I know I got to do this. I'm going to go for it. And so what happened was that I decided, okay, I'll do it. I'll do it for a year. I'll take on it. And I started thinking, okay, what is my vision? How do I get the input of everybody else? And we started building a very, very robust 3-pillar group. One pillar focused on the employee development, one pillar focused on helping the business sort of expand its market to the Hispanic and Latinx community. And the third pillar was to help the community, okay? And so with those 3 pillars in mind, I picked 2 people to co-lead with me, or co-lead each of those pillars. So it was like a duo, a dynamic duo for each of those pillars, and it worked well. And to this day, I left the leadership. I wanted to step aside to give opportunity to somebody else to step in, which is also very important. Like, let other people get the taste of what it means to run an organization. Oftentimes we get, stuck with terms, which is like, and some people, I mean, look what's happening in China right now, right? The new leaders, basically appointed to be emperor for like Deng Xiaoping for the rest of his life. And I'm not necessarily knowing that's the right thing to do, because you want to have other people experience leadership. It's great for continuity, but I'm not sure if it is necessarily great for leadership development and talent development, right? And so I stepped aside and I sort of advised the folks that are now the leads, and I love it. It's great to see them shine, to see them grow. So with that, I'll pause here and see if there's any questions. I'm going to check the chat. Oh, leadership's not yet. Any questions? Dan, any comments?
So I actually think that you're, so kind of going back, so Matthias had mentioned that he really liked your comment that it's leadership is an art, not a science. And I think you're right. And so I'm kind of inspired by your story and recognizing that that there was an opportunity in a vacuum to step up and to have confidence in yourself and push yourself into an uncomfortable area to lead a group, to establish a framework and to continue to move forward and to get and to start, maybe you didn't know what the vision was, but to lay out a vision that you were open to evolving that would be inclusive, right? And so that's kind of how I interpret your journey. And then to go through a period of reflection to say, really, the opportunity I have is not just I fulfilled a goal of mine, which was to lay out a vision and engage people and to maybe change direction. But then now I can step back and I can advise the next group of leaders. And so, and hopefully I'm a resource to them. But you know what? I think you didn't say this, but this is how I would interpret knowing you, is that they are a resource to you of knowing how to advise and how to better craft new leaders for new positions.
Right, correct. And that's super important, because what you start to notice is who has that spark, and being able to quickly identify people that are willing to step up. And it happened, I think it's often in our community. This is interesting. I'll give you 2 examples. So there was a young lady from Brazil. She was an intern, and I spotted, like, there's talent right there. I think she's being overlooked. And so I talked to her. I said, listen, when you go back to school, she was going to finish her PhD. I said, I want you to see if you can figure out a way to work with our team. I said, even if it's just for 10 hours a week. I just wanted to get and see, her skills. And so the reason why is because I want to make sure that we brought her back in and find a role for her in the company. And so, as opportunities were coming, it was in the fall. It was about 2 years ago, and 2 or 3 positions came up, which she was very suitable for. But there was one of the 3 positions was something that she thought perhaps was, I don't know, she sold herself short, basically. And she said, no, I don't know if I should apply for that. And I told her, I said, hey, listen, you have got to throw your name in the hat for that position. And I took her to the room and I said, I was pretending to be upset. And it was more just an encouraging. It was like, you got to go for this. And long story short, she applied and she got the job. She did. And as an hermanita or Latina friend, I think it's our role for us that are more senior to be able to pull people up and encourage them, because oftentimes there's a bit of a hesitation to be able to do that, right? Especially for women that feel that there's research being done on that, but when there's a job description, men perhaps are underqualified. They go for those positions, even though they don't meet all the check boxes. Where women, they say if they don't meet all the check boxes, they won't apply. And so if that is the case at large, think about what happens also with our community, where people, like I said, maybe their cultural differences, well, like they don't want to challenge. And so we've got to usher and encourage our younger talent to go for those positions. That was one of them. The second one was, as I was looking at somebody to replace me in Amigos, a young man from Colombia had joined the organization. He had been there for about 6-7 months. And I said, hey, I think you ought to step in like these shoes. Because when I left them, there were 2 people that I wanted them to co-lead so they can help each other out, right? And so he was like, but I just started. I said, you know what? You've got the skills. I know that you'll be able to handle this and make an impact. And so he did, and he's been doing a great job. So oftentimes I think that some people feel that they don't have all the experience, all the skills to do a job. And sometimes that's a limitation. So I would invite every person in the panel that is perhaps recent graduate, recent in career, is just to take on those roles, and you will learn so much, and the organization will benefit from your participation. I'm going to check the chat over here. It's board someone, but it doesn't feel like they are. That's right. Yeah. So this leads me to, well, any thoughts or comments about that? So we have to usher along the talent. We have to pull them up. We have to put in good words. I tell you, the biggest lesson I've learned in the past few years is to help somebody along, to really, really be a mentor or a big brother or a big sister. There's actually a lot of work that goes into it, to be honest. You can do a little bit in terms of like, well, I'm going to put in a good word, and that should be fine. But sometimes in our organization at CUNA Mutual, we don't have a lot of people that are Latinx or Hispanic, Latino. And so we're constantly trying to bring people and putting good words and saying, you can fit here, in there. So it's a lot of work. Yeah.
Edgar, can I, I think we're talking about one dynamic here, which it occurred to me when we were talking about imposter syndrome, about being the leader, right? And so, and one of the things that we don't always think about as being a good leader is sometimes to be a good leader, you also have to be a good follower. And as I was thinking about the paradox of leadership, and I'd be interested in like your commentary or thought here, is how do we, knowing when we want to stand out or we're in the presence of leaders, right? So if I was, how do we accept, or how do we learn to accept that help or accept somebody else's leadership in challenging us to become better overall? Like, how do we recognize that? Is that just a maturity thing, or,
Yeah, I think, again, it goes back to the humility aspect of it, that I think there are times when, and George Patton, I think there's a general, I took that quote out because it was just too militaristic, but he says, either, he said, lead me, follow me, or get out of the way. So I like the first part because it says lead me, right? It says, I'm willing, even though I'm general, I want somebody to take the bull by the horns, and I will follow them if they have the vision. And so I would say, if you're in a situation, Dan or anybody else, where maybe you're used to leading, and then all of a sudden somebody steps in, and how do you step back? And I wouldn't say is judgment, because I think we all judge, and that's kind of our flaw, right? We're human nature. We constantly pass judgment, like, well, this person did this way, I could have done it better. And I think it's kind of hard to escape that. But I think learning is like, what are they doing well that perhaps I have not done? How are they asking the questions? Maybe they're very good at asking questions. Maybe they're very good at being inclusive. Maybe they're very good at allowing others to talk when they're not speaking. If we were all in a room right now and we're having a conversation, what I would do is I would pick up and say, who has not spoken? And say, what do you think? I know it's a chat, and we're trying to manage just the format, but that's what I would do. And I think just my antennas have gone up because I've been on the other side, where I've been in a table, perhaps maybe somebody has not asked for my opinion, but I feel very refreshed when somebody says, hey, Edgar, what do you think about this? Like, oh, wow, you really care about my opinion? Well, let me share with you. So I don't know if that answers your question there, but it is this opportunity where it's almost like a mirror, right? You're seeing it's not yourself, but you're seeing what are the qualities that you can pick up from that other person, that I would say. All right, so I'm going to move on. I'm going to share with you what I would call the mistakes or myths. I'm just going to give you 5 mistakes or myths towards the end here of this presentation that I've sort of picked up from my, almost 20 years of being in different roles. And I've had a number of jobs in different, small firms, large firms, the United States, outside the United States, different industries. And so the first one that I would say before, I'm sorry, I don't know why this is here, but is this idea about titles equals influence. That's a myth. I would say if you look at the people on the left-hand side of this image, some of them did not have titles. They would say they are the CEO, or they're the president, or they're this and that. These are people that had a passion, a belief, an ethos that was stronger than anything else, right? See, from Martin Luther King, Gandhi, Rosa Parks, Jesus, Chavez, and Malala. These are just folks that, again, they didn't necessarily have a title, but they had influence. So that was the first thing, and I have come to recognize that. So I'm not as strong anymore as far as somebody has like, ooh, they're the this and that. I don't get awed by that anymore. I used to be like, oh, I'm rubbing shoulders with the Secretary of Commerce of Argentina. One time I was sitting at a table and the man was like, I don't know, he didn't really captivate me. It's like, I don't know, he must have gotten there because somebody assigned him and he said, you're going to be the person, right? And so that doesn't impress me anymore. Titles don't impress me anymore, but influence does. The second one is this idea that high IQ equals high EQ, right? So the intelligent quotient versus emotional quotient. I've worked for very smart people in my life. I work for very nice people. And I've worked also for people that are very smart, but not very kind. And that seems to last very short. I think when I see people leaving or there's turnover, even though the individuals are very smart, is because something is missing, right? There's this idea, somebody mentioned empathy, or somebody put in the chat empathy. So you want to work with people that inspire and that care about you as an individual, right? That when we check in the office, or like, how are you doing today? Like, did you get enough sleep? How's the family? They really care about you versus, I had, oh man, I had somebody reporting to me. And I told them, I said, listen, we're going to meet with this leader, very senior executive. I said, just be careful, be careful what you say. And, just because he will put you in a place that I may not be able to help you and save you and come into your rescue if we're all there. Well, he didn't listen to me. And so we're at this meeting. He asked a question and this senior leader just attacked him and put him down. And it was just ugly. And just said, if you're asking that type of question, it really tells me what, who you are, what kind of, just call him ignorant, basically. Like, oh no, I'm like, I was telling you, be careful. I didn't want to say, don't say anything because I want him to speak up. But that individual, the one that was a senior executive, was lacking this emotional quotient to make people feel, better. And so I would say that having the balance between IQ and EQ is super important. All right, mistake number 3, that praise is good, criticism is bad. Now, we all love praise. We all love hey, bravo. All right, Dan. All right, Edgar. Good job. Yes, we don't. And we don't really like criticism, right? But I think this is perhaps something cultural. And I've learned is that here in the Midwest, it's like Midwest nice. And people kind of joke about passive aggressiveness. And people are like, oh, yeah, they're stuck like that. And then all of a sudden behind people's bags are like, oh yeah, but he could have done this and that. And I think what praise does, if there's continuous praise, is it creates this blind spot in you that you believe in, and you don't check to see areas where you could improve. Okay. And so I say this both from a person that is a leader, and also if you're a leader, how you give feedback to the people that are following you. Okay. And so I had a chance. I always tell people that report for me, I said, listen, I want you to be frank. I want you to be honest. In fact, I want you to disagree with me. There's not going to be repercussions if you disagree with me, as long as we do it respectfully, but challenge me. And I tell them, and the young people have said, they get comfortable. They think that I'm joking, and I'm not joking, because I don't want us to always come in agreement, because we'll never become better as a result of the dialogue. That's so take praise with a grain of salt, but also take criticism with a grain of salt, because not all criticism is bad. Okay, they talked about constructive criticism, right? And I say that, a friend, a really good friend, a true friend, is actually going to be somebody that tells you something that perhaps other people may not be willing to tell you. Okay, and they do it delicately, they do it out of love, and you say, listen, here, I think you were out of line when you said that comment, and they do it in privately, so as not to put you in front of other people and shame you, right? And so when you think about that, both again as a recipient or as a giver, is finding ways to, yes, compliment, but also being honest and say, these are some of the areas that you need to work on. And so again, maybe this is cultural. If you go to a place like Israel, the culture there is one where they're not afraid to give criticism. It's something really, really strange. If you ever read the book, The Startup Nation, I don't know, Dan, you probably have read it. They talk about the culture there, probably because they go to the military first, and it's actually in that country, it is like going to an Ivy League school. If you get selected to the military, it's actually which branch of the military you go to that is like a Harvard or a Yale or whatnot. And then you come out of the military and then you go into the workforce. And as opposed to the United States, where people are kind of like, got dragged to go to the military, over there is something that people, actually look forward to. But because of that, they develop tough skin. Why? Because they know that to survive in the field or in the real world, you cannot mess around and say, wow, this is just, you're doing so great. You're just wonderful. Like, no, man, you're like, or you can challenge your general or your colonel, said, that was a bad decision. Their stories. That's what happens in the Israeli military. They challenge senior officials, but it is why? Because they want to make it better. They want to know, and this is why they have some of the most elite units in the world. The Israeli military, right? I mean, they're in the middle of a whole bunch of neighbors surrounded that could attack them at any moment, right? So they have to be on their toes. I'm going to check the chat here real quick. So almost opposite. Totally beautiful. Passion, mental health. Yes, emotional caregivers are still saving. Yes, there's there's a lot of stuff on emotional and health. I'm going to try to see if I can do mental health. Absolutely. Yeah, that's a big topic, especially in these days, right? I mean, people are, because of the pandemic, they all have to be confined to a certain area. You're a family person and you got your work, and then there's all these things that accumulates it. But I'm going to talk a little bit about towards the end about that topic. So thank you for bringing it up. So number 4, I'm almost done here, is acting versus being. Okay, and what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that, do you lead or behave? How do you lead or behave when nobody's watching? Right? When you walk into your place of employment or academics, we tend to behave differently to accommodate the circumstances. But what happens when nobody's watching you? That's who you really are, and that's one of the things that, if you're acting as a leader, you're acting as a leader in a certain circumstance, but then you're out in public, and then you happen to be losing your temper in the middle of the parking lot because your toddler is not listening to you, running around. That's going to create some sort of dissonance, right? And we all have those moments. And I'm not saying you got to be always perfect. It's not about being perfect. It's about being genuine. And so being, the more you align yourself with those pillars, whatever pillars you admire, the more it starts to transform you. Does that make sense? It's just because what happens is acting as a leader is unsustainable. It's unsustainable. You cannot always act because you're not always going to be. But being a leader, one, would you know where you stand and know what what's your MO, for example, is regardless of the circumstance, regardless, you will be able to know how to respond to those situations. Okay. And any comments on that, Dan?
No, I like the acting versus being. I think that again, you kind of given me a new topic to think about there. But I was kind of reflecting upon this, right? And you know, who you are at work versus who you are with your family and friends. You know, I mean,
Yeah, absolutely. We all have that. I think from my behavioral psychology class in college, it was, I think they called that liminal space. Liminal, which is an odd term, but liminal space is how your behavior changes as a result of the space that you're walking into, right? And so what I want to do so that I don't have cognitive incongruence, if you will, or emotional incongruence is I really want to be as aligned as possible as to who I am, so that I don't have to go into an effort of being a different person every time, right? And it's one of the terms maybe that best explains it today is like code switching, right? Code switching. You're like, well, now I'm with a bunch of Latinos, I guess voy a hablar español, y entonces yo soy de esta forma otra. But people that know me, I think you would say that, you know, I try to be at home and I work like the same person, because it's just too much to try to be somebody else every time, two different people. And you know, Dan, we've talked a number of times, and I think, you know, I don't, you know, quiet up and like I'm presenting now to you today. You know,
no.
You know, I just try to be like this with, you know, with the people that I know. So I want to see, there's a chat over here. Let's make part of conversation for development. Yes. So last but not least here, the failure. So the last one is about mistake number 5 is thinking that failure is bad. And you know, as you see on the left-hand side here is first attempt in learning. I couldn't agree more with that. I was running some experiments. I've been in the innovation space where we constantly are testing and learning. And I remember one time I was running this huge project out of in a prior company, an American family. That's where I worked at before. And I was documenting all the learnings of the pilot program. And there was a new leader that came, a new manager, and he says, okay, so tell me, like, how's it going? And I told him, I was like, oh, you know, like, well, that looks like it's failing. I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm like, I've saved the company so much money as a result of doing small and rapid tests to make sure that you don't invest millions of dollars into something that's not going to work. And it baffled me because he realized like that person did not understand that part of innovation is this idea that you're gonna burn some dollars, but you're not gonna burn the whole budget doing something that is not gonna pay off. And so the biggest mistake actually in leadership or in innovation is not learning from your mistakes, not knowing, because here's something else. When you make a mistake, you think, okay, I got to find the cause, what led me. But rarely do people do the same when they have succeeded. Think about it. You think, wow, I had a really great presentation. All right, well, time to eat lunch because, you know, that's time. Like, what actually made it a good presentation? Did I pause enough? Did I, ask good questions to the audience? Did I explain? Did I use the best metaphor? Was that enough? And so if we don't do that, right? So we do this attribution error to success or something without really thinking maybe it was just a fluke, or maybe it was just luck. Of course, in this case, there's some preparation involved, but sometimes you have a positive outcome with a bad decision, going back to the beginning, and you don't realize, oh, maybe that actually shouldn't have happened in the first place. So with that, I know we're about 3 minutes here. I'm going to give you pose this question, and that is, if you were a thread on this flag, where would you want to be? Okay, you are a thread on this flag. Would you want to be in the outskirts there, in the middle, towards the center of the mast? And I've asked this question to different people, and it's interesting to hear their answers, because it's like, well, I like to be there in the middle because there's a lot of action happening, you're moving around with the wind. But I say this because as leaders, you are going to be ruffled by the winds. And so the question is, to me, I want to be as close to the mast as possible, where regardless of the winds, regardless of the climate, regardless of the environment, I am as steady as possible. And so at least that's how I would answer this question. But the answer may be different for you. If it's the same as me, then the question is, what is your mast? What is your center? What is your ground, right? And so this brings me to the last question is, I would start at the beginning, where are you from, or where do you come from? The next question is, or the final question is, where do you want to go? Who do you want to follow? and who are you taking along? If all of a sudden somebody said, hey, we're going to go to this galaxy, this is called the Whirlpool Galaxy, officially it's like M51, Messier 51A. It is about 31 million light years away. If somebody said, we're going to go there, would you go? Who would you want to go with? Who would you want to take along? And who's going to follow you? And I think it's important because, you know, we may not be heading to a new galaxy, but we'll be heading to a new position, a new realm, a new organization. We'll have a chance to be a leader. So the question is, who are you going to follow? What is the mental model that you're going to have as you go into your new opportunity, new business, and so forth? So with that, I'm going to pause here. I'm asking, maybe I know we have a couple minutes for Q&A. Any comments, Dan? Anybody from the audience?
Man, I loved it. I'll fill a little bit of time as we get some of the comments back in, but I really liked your presentation. There's two of the myths that really kind of struck to me were the criticism and the failure. Is people not being able to, like, I think it's hard to deliver criticism sometimes and to be sensitive, and that's where that empathy piece comes in. It's also hard to take criticism, right? And that's where that failure piece comes in, because when your failures are public and you're being criticized for them, you know, some people have their first reaction is to respond with force, right? And that could be verbal or physical, right? Most likely verbal. And then number two, because I think if there's a comment there, and I want to be conscious of time, is your flag question was really interesting. And so in your answer was, and one of the things that I wrote down during the presentation was, I think something that I respect about leaders is that they're reliable, that they execute, that they follow through, right? Because that is that pinnacle. You showed the flag, and you gave me your answer, which was like, I want to be as close to the mass and reliable, and I really like that. And I saw that flag, and I said, I want to be on the edge because I want to leave everything on the field.
You know, and it's funny because you see the flag there I'm putting in. I mean, it's ripped. I mean, some of those threads, they're like hanging on for their life. Like, look at the one here at the top. It's just floating out there before you know it's going to be. And so, you know, for me, and I'll just say this, you know, I tend to think about leaders in my life, and it's hard. I mean, there's a lot of adjectives that come up, and no one person alive today has all those things. But to me, there is somebody, and to me, as you know, somebody that lived about 2,000 years ago, you know, that changed my life, and it's changed the life of a lot of people. You know, good old JC, Jesus Christ is, to me, that's my anchor, right? And the reason why I say that is because I have never met or heard people. I love Einstein, you know, Albert Einstein. In fact, I have a tattoo on my arm about Einstein with his tongue sticking out. You probably didn't know that, Dan. But, you know, I don't think I've ever met somebody who says, oh man, Einstein, he changed my life. You know, I used to be this kind of person, but because of Einstein, now I'm a different type of person. And so to me, that's where my anchor comes from, right? And that's where I get my serenity, by kind of following the leadership of somebody that lived 12,000 years ago that is still being talked about and admired today. So that's my anchor. I just want to kind of share a little confession with this group.
I think that's actually probably a conversation worthy of a future presentation, to actually talk about faith, because I think faith is a component that we in the professional world we run away from, and we don't necessarily always think about embracing. And faith can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people, so it doesn't have to be confined into one channel.
Right.
But that being said, it's a little after 1 o'clock. So for your 20-minute presentation, as it turned out to be an hour and 3 minutes. That was an impressive 20 minutes that we put into that hour and 3 minutes. So thank you very much. And on behalf of the LPA, we are really appreciative for you taking time today to share your journey, knowledge, and to challenge us. So with that, this is a formal end to the presentation. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Dan. Fue un placer. Hasta luego.
Hasta luego. All right.